before I jump in. All right, thank you both so much for joining us. Let me admit. So I'm going to start with a couple of questions for Greg, and then we'll throw over to Susanne. Greg, I was surprised to learn that family businesses account for around 70% of all businesses in Australia. So when we've been talking about small and medium businesses as part of this event, we really cannot ignore that a very large cohort of those are family businesses. So what, though, is special about family businesses?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Thanks for having us on today. It's a pleasure to be here. Look, just a little bit of background. So Family Business Australia has been around for about 22 years. I've been at the helm for the last coming up to 4 years. You're right, our research indicates about 70% of all businesses in Australia and about 80% in New Zealand are family-owned and operated businesses. So approximate numbers, that sort of represents about 2.5 million businesses would be family owned and operated in Australia alone. We're a member-based organisation currently representing about 3,500 members. So we've got a long way to go to capture the full market. Certainly when talking to people about the organisation I work for, and they all, they come back, oh, so you represent small business. We certainly represent small family businesses, but we also represent medium and even large size family businesses. So they come from all shapes and forms in terms of family and operations. Families, what I love about this business is that families have I suppose, a generational purpose. They're not thinking about, we're not saying you don't think in quarters, you think in generations. Corporates sort of think in quarters and only sort of operate from quarter to quarter. Families are preparing for 12, 24, 36 months out about where they're going, but more about how they're planning their life for the next generation to come through. That creates complexity, and I'm sure Susanne will delve into that a bit further. But really, from our point of view, we get a lot of people who come to us, particularly the bigger size family businesses. The bigger the business, the more wealth attached to the biggest, the more families attached to the business, the harder those conversations become about that transfer of management, transfer of ownership, and transfer of wealth between one generation to the next. And we know over the next 10 years, we've got the baby boomers sort of coming to probably towards their end, and we're probably going to see something like about $4 trillion worth of wealth transfer from one generation to the next. So what we're going to see is really, I think, a huge amount of entrepreneurial next generation leaders coming into their own, and probably wanting to make changes about the way that their business and their behaviours are around being a sustainable family within a sustainable environment moving forward. So, in terms of purpose, their purpose is to look after family. Their strong family values shine through. When you think about a family, a lot of the times their name is above the door, and they're really proud about the fact that their name's above the door, and they take that really that messaging out to the public. It's all about not just about their family, but the environment they work in. It's also about the community and the community setting that they're involved in, because their name is really out there in the lights as well. So they take great pride in the work that they do. That's the majority of people, and the work that they're trying to do on behalf of their family for future generations. So that's enough to give you an idea.
Yeah, I think it's obviously some specific considerations when it comes to those family businesses, and how, I guess, they make decisions within business, which we'll certainly dig into. So now I was very interested to hear you say that Family Business Australia recently conducted a survey where sustainability was rated as one of the biggest issues, I guess, by the family businesses, and looking forward over the next 10 years. So could you clarify, I guess, a little bit on the details and why you think that is the case, and what specifically they are facing?
So I'm a bit of a foresight strategist believer, which is about looking into the future and trying to get an understanding about what might be the drivers that are coming. When you look at a lot of strategies or strategists who focus on short term, sometimes and you've got competitors in the marketplace, sometimes that research has been looked upon, all the information has been looked upon by the same people, and all of a sudden you're trying to go to market with the same philosophies and the same strategies as the company next door. So we went about looking at putting together a long-term vision for Family Business Australia. So we really went out and surveyed about 120 of our members. Both about 50% of those would have been family business owners, and the other half were advisors. We have members who advise family businesses on things such as succession and wealth management, etc., about the challenges facing the family business sector over the next 10 years. And when you couple that back around the entrepreneurial leaders coming in as the baby boomers move on, I thought it was a really, really good exercise to do, really trying to understand what might be the pressure points for a family business and how do they, and so from an FBA point of view, if we have a better understanding about what's coming, we can actually put programs and products and procedures in place to potentially have them in place. So as the market changes and as consumer behaviours change and as family business wanting to adapt, we're in a position to help them ahead of the curve rather than sort of being behind the curve. And so one of the things that really came out through that survey was the issue around sustainability. And so that word sustainable is a huge, big word. It can mean many things to many people. There are those early adopters who are really making changes now. But for a lot of family businesses, just even understanding what that word sustainable really, what it really means, is an important first step. And that overwhelmingly came back in our research as saying the biggest issue facing family businesses is the understanding of what does sustainable mean, both from a family business point of view, so how do you become sustainable from one generation to the next, but also environmentally, how do they prepare their business so it is sustainable with changing consumer behaviours coming. We look around the world, and just this is a personal opinion, but I think Australia is a long way behind the rest of the world in many areas around this word sustainable. So when I look at Family Business Australia and what is its role, we provide. We are an organisation that provides a pathway for family businesses to find the solutions they're looking for. We might not be the solution provider, and predominantly that's been around that succession piece. Families come to us. They've got these issues with their family. They come through some educational programs. And they come out the other side better aware of the situation, but more importantly, better prepared to talk to advisors, talk to experts in the area about the areas of interest and things they want to address. And so when we're an organisation as a peak body that represents 70% of all businesses in Australia, I think we are well placed to actually be that vehicle for families to come in and find that information. What is sustainable? How do I actually start making that change? What does that mean economically for my business? What does that mean from a consumer point of view? It's all very well to go, right, I'm going to run off to the right here and I'm just going to change everything up. I'm going to put solar panels on my roof. I'm going to spend all this money to change my business. But is it economical for them to do it? How do they start making those steps? So it's a really important pathway for FBA to start undertaking, and having conversations like this today is one of those first steps of trying to let families know that there will be opportunities to understand and become more in tune with what is this word sustainable. How do they start embedding conversations within the family, and how do they start embedding those conversations not only just with the family but within their workforce, who are almost subsequent family members, the way that they treat their employees and team around them. We've already started down the pathways of talking to you, Sarah. We think what you do is fantastic in this space. There are others already out there, such as a B Corporation, who are well advanced in trying to take businesses down this path of certification and understanding it. But I think from an FBA point of view, there's a step well back here, which is actually what is sustainable and how do I learn about it? And so my role over the coming sort of years is to start building up content, accessing courses, accessing information to allow our members to become better, to have better knowledge around this space, and then start asking experts out there and advisors out there who get it and can start guiding family businesses on a pathway to be environmentally sustainable for future generations to come. So that's sort of where we're going as an organisation. And it's one of many pillars that we have, but I think this is a really important one. I think, again, and I'll finish off in just a second, but from an advocacy point of view, we're meant to be the peak body that advocates on behalf of family business. It's really hard to advocate on behalf of family businesses when we cross every industry sector. There's normally an association that represents individual sectors. So is there a pathway from an advocacy point of view that allows us to be a chief spokesperson to government around this? I think we're well placed to actually represent 70% of the people and talk to government about the messaging from our members. So I'm interested in getting our members' feedback back in so we can formulate discussions and points to take to government, but also be a voice back out to the family business sector of what the government is doing, so family business can be ahead of the curve for now and into the future. Yeah, that's sort of where we're heading as one pathway.
Yeah. Perfect. And it's interesting when you're talking about that, the drivers, I guess, and helping family businesses to understand these trends and how they are going to impact on the business. Just a little bit earlier, we were talking with Corinne Schock from the Global Compact Network about the Sustainable Development Goals and how those are actually such a good tool for understanding what those broader drivers are going to be and how important that is for a family business, obviously, to understand this is where the world is going. We're not interested in just the next couple of years, but we want to make sure that our business continues for our children to continue it on.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we've started forging relationships with the United Nations, Victoria, New South Wales, and around Australia, and they're heavily focused on the Sustainable Development Goals. When I look at our counterparts in Switzerland, so there's a Family Business Network in Switzerland, and they sort of have a model like us where they have franchises around the world, if you like. They partnered with B Corp as well, and have a system called Polaris, and it's really about educating the family business back-ended by B Corp about families wanting to make a change. So we can see it coming, and we see opportunities to partner with organisations that we can really take that information and upskill and educate our members and future members about what is this thing called sustainable? How do I make a difference to the world, but again for the future generations of their family to be sustainable in the future? So yeah, it's exciting times. I'm really excited about these type of conversations and where it can lead.
Yeah, like of a much broader transition happening at the same time.
Sure.
So Susanna, I'd like to throw to you, and then later Greg can come back into the conversation. What is unique about governance for sustainability for a family business? I know that you look at family governance at a broad level, having worked with many family businesses, including your own. So what is so unique about a family business in that way?
Well, first of all, Sarah, thanks again for having us on board and also just mirroring what Greg was saying around this issue and what is sustainability, what does it mean for us, and how do we actually take any steps in that space? And what makes family businesses so incredibly unique and why governing family businesses is so different is when you look at a privately owned business of any kind that is not necessarily family, the focus on a governance perspective seems to generally be driven from a strategic perspective to achieve certain goals. And then you start looking, of course, how you're going to filter that through the organization on the operational front and from a cultural perspective. And if you've got the right level of leadership, this realization that there's a requirement to have a positive culture, to be positively impacting people in your environment and everything that you sort of touch. If that is part of leadership, then it really does come from that business place. I find it so fascinating that we have a country like many others where we have 70% of businesses being family owned, and yet very few people understand just how complex that makes even everyday decision making. Because unlike a leadership team that can look at things objectively and business-like and come together to look at what's best for business and what's best for those who are impacted by the business or are feeding into the business, the family quite often tends to also get very caught up in who are we and who are we now and who are we then, and quite often these conversations don't take place. So how do you create a values-based approach and a culture that allows the family members to connect on something that they can agree with and align on, that you then that goes across to the business? So this concept of the family values and view and purpose on life to actually flow through the business and live within the business. Because as you can imagine, if you have 10 people within the family and you've got 5 of them working in the business and they haven't never really aligned on what sustainability is for them, what kind of purpose they have and how they want to show up, the moment you've got people working in the business who are family who might be a little bit disruptive for whatever reason it might be, it doesn't matter how beautiful your vision is if you actually end up having family members working against others within the business and within the family. So the family dynamic has a huge impact on the business culture, has a huge impact on how they have the capacity to even understand sustainability, and how to then make that come alongside and live with what they stand for as a family. So you almost have these two different paths that you want to align. And I think sustainability is a wonderful way to join generations and join conversation. But if nobody really knows what it means, and if you have, let's say, one generation thinking sustainability is a threat to the business performance, and another generation thinking that sustainability is everything that we need to stand for to be able to survive into the future and do the right thing by all, how do you actually, so you can sort of see how your ownership can be really stretched in perspectives on this. And so if they're not aligned and are not looking at that alignment and decision making from a family perspective first, then it's going to be unlikely to flow through to the business any broader than what you tend to find, which is in operational matters. They tend to be quite switched on, in particular if they're in the agricultural sector. They are very aware of the impact they have on the land that they farm on or grow on. So you can sort of see why it's important to look at governance in that space from a slightly different perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. All of us have a family, so I can only imagine how difficult that can be sometimes. And these eggshells that you probably have to walk on with some of these businesses. So how do you recommend that a family business therefore plan for sustainability and integrate that into their family governance approach?
As I said, it really needs to come from the family as a collective to start off with. It's this concept of finding out what sustainability actually means. I think that will be a really great starting point, which is why this initiative is so fantastic for. I think there's probably a fear element attached to it for most businesses who can come across this term and have large consulting firms guiding them to even find a starting point and see how this is going to have an impact or a positive impact for them, to then align on the purpose, values, vision around sustainability and create the different perspectives that really need to come to the forefront. As I said, somebody from the next generation will have a very different perspective than somebody from one of the founding generation might have. And in the absence of, finding a common ground on that and finding purpose and passion within that, there's probably going to be a lot of discrepancy and a lot of disrupt. So then sustainability could have the opposite effect to what it should be. I see this whole framework as being something that should unite the generations and should connect the family into the business much more strongly than any other kind of framework and topic that exists. But I think, as I say, we are very much at the early stages of starting to look at these as something that businesses find easy to find something that's right for them and find a way to measure it and find a way to get some sort of some wins out of that. I think it's stepping away from the pure financial performance drivers will give people a lot more meaning even within their own business and allow them to have a much longer term perspective rather than a short term financial focus. I think it aligns beautifully with who family businesses are anyway. So it fits that long term thinking, but it also is possible to connect generations, but you need to start with the family coming together to start learning about what this is and how it aligns to them.
I think it's also very interesting that we often think about the generations as almost butting heads of, there's all of the millennials think that the boomers don't care about the environment. And, we keep saying that as millennials come up, then there will be kind of this culture shift. But I think that it's not nearly so black and white, not nearly so cut and dry as that. There's a significant portion of people who are actually creating change in business these days are the baby boomers and Gen Xers who, after a certain point of success in their careers, they start thinking, oh, what am I trying to achieve beyond just getting more money? So would you say that there is that those stereotypes between those generations, I guess, have they played out for in what you've observed with the businesses that you work with, or are they totally wrong?
Well, I would love to say that they're totally wrong because I'm a Gen X, and I would love to say that I have my head all around and across this. I think the first thing is what you're describing around generations butting heads is exactly how it is supposed to be to a certain extent. It's the next generation's job to challenge the older generation. Otherwise, we're just going to keep ending up with what we've already had, in the same way that it's the older generation's job to impart wisdom and make room and guide instead of blocking. So there's a bit of, it's a bit of mellowing of those borders. What I find fascinating is that as a Gen X and somebody who's very concerned around the impact that we have been having, and how we can change that, I'm also to a certain extent probably somewhat bound by my patterns, habits, my upbringing, and also I'm probably almost blind to some of the things that can easily be done to be embracing sustainability more. And so I've got some young people working with me, and one of them who's 22 is my social conscience, because there are ways that I don't think that way because I'm used to consuming in a certain way. I'm used to behaving in a way, and I find the next generation has a much different approach to it. So I'm embracing it, but on my own. And as somebody who really cares about this topic, I still am sometimes shocked at my own choices that I make, because I just don't know any better. I revert to norm, and it's something that's slowly changing, but without this input from those that are trying to preserve what is going to be matter for them in the future. It'll be much harder if you leave me up to my own devices. And so I know that my parents find it even harder. And you do see that in family businesses, holding on to tradition, holding on to relationships with suppliers or clients that have always been right for the family. And this is what I'm saying. It's not as simple as having a strategic mindset and doing what's best and what's most logical. You have to overcome 20, 30, 40, 50 years of stories and legacy that lives within a family business. And it's hard to actually break through that. So that's certainly something that I do see a lot of. And as I said, this concept of we want to create a sustainable future for all. Okay, so what does it mean? No idea, but we want it. And so this is, I'm sure a lot of family businesses and businesses in general find themselves in that position and are a little bit stuck.
Yeah, I guess it's whether you're talking about sustainability or just general, family conflicts, there's always that role of the younger generations to be challenging the norm, and the role of the older generations be trying to maintain it. So that makes sense. Do you have any good examples that you could offer of some businesses where they have found, I guess, a shared purpose or shared value around a particular area of sustainability? So not just trying to be sustainable as a whole, but perhaps they found that they were all very passionate about poverty or climate change or something like that.
Yeah, so one of the families I've been working with, and I mentioned this concept around creating a sustainable future for all through the process of looking at family values and family purpose and a lot of other things that are part of family governance. Did they come up with that as something that really mattered to them? And it was interesting to then start looking into, well, this is something that you're quite aware of. And again, it is an agricultural company, so they were already looking at some of the good practices. But it was interesting to bring the next generation into it, and those that didn't necessarily work in the company, to then start bringing other frameworks of what this could mean and how social impact or positive impact could take place. But also for them to start sharing when the family would get together, what kind of initiatives were actually already being undertaken within the family business that they hadn't even thought about. How innovative they were being and what a positive impact it had. And through that process, did they actually end up coming up or starting to register some of or trademarking some of the concepts and the IP, and realizing that what they were doing was going to have a positive flow through effect also to other growers within the region. So they started to be much more mindful of their practices, their R&D, and also looking at other avenues to follow their own purpose. So that was really wonderful to see. But they've been doing a few things intuitively anyway. You tend to find most family businesses have a purpose greater than themselves. They just haven't got they just haven't got any idea really how to articulate that. It's very implicit. So making that explicit and helping them to find different ways of A, living that in the family, and B, measuring it in the business and improving it in the business is really what good family and business governance going hand in hand for family business around sustainability should be about.
Yeah, we keep hearing that, I guess, that a lot of businesses who are centered around purpose may not even recognize that about themselves.
No, they don't. It's very implicit, and it's just part of who they are, and part of how they've been shaping their, they call it customer service, or they call it caring for staff. So they just give it completely different names, and they haven't really worked out what it actually is.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's good news for a lot of these businesses that they are a lot more sustainable and social impact and ethical than they've realized yet. So, if anyone has any questions, please do pop them into the chat box. For now, I'll go ahead and ask my usual question of both Susanna and Greg, of your one top tip, your one piece of advice for family-owned businesses looking to be more sustainable this year.
Ladies first, of course.
No, of course, I was going to go to FBA and okay. I think from my perspective, the first thing is for families to come together and take this topic into their family, regardless of whether family members are working in the business or not. Make it something that the family starts discussing and find some meaning for, and before it comes back into the business realm.
Yeah, I'd support that. Certainly having those conversations now. I mean, it's difficult for a next generation leader to broach those topics with the incumbent, particularly if the business has been set for, bricks and mortar type business has been set for a long time. A lot of the times the incumbent is like, well, I'm going to hand over this business as is, and my expectations are, well, it ran beautifully for whilst I was around. I expect it to run the same way moving forward. So to start having those conversations now is important. And even if it's just, what do you think about that? Putting in some information forward, investigating consumer behaviours and the changes in consumer behaviours, and ensuring that the business is starting to think about the way that the consumer is acting and behaving, because it will have an impact. We're already seeing it now in the way that, obviously we just lived through COVID. And the changing environment, even in the workplace today, has changed dramatically, even in just 12 months as a result of a pandemic. And the way that we're now interacting, through these type of meetings versus a stage, is now having a positive impact environmentally. You're not hopping on a plane, traveling everywhere. So how businesses starting to think about how the world might affect their business over the next 10 years. I mentioned that FBA just did its foresight strategy, with a view that we wanted to try and get an understanding about some of the obstacles facing this sector and wanting to be on the front foot on it. So, we're doing it now. Most businesses, regardless of what they do, should be also having a look at the environment they're in today, what potentially they might see as the changes coming, and how do they adapt and start preparing for that. This foresight strategy is really called scenario planning. You can't predict the future. What you can do is prepare for it and prepare for different scenarios. And I put an analogy down. I've been an AFL fan. AFL clubs in their training practice drill after drill, particularly, for example, it's the last 5 minutes. They might be holding a slender lead. The wind's blowing in a certain direction. How do they kick the ball out to ensure that the opposition don't get it? And they'll practice that time and time again for that one opportunity or that one occurrence that actually does happen. And if it does, they're prepared for it. They've got the processes, they've got the strategies and the thought process in place to deal with that, rather than sort of saying, shit, we're 1 minute down, the wind's blowing, and we've got to hold on for 5 minutes. What do we do now? And they all run off around in circles, and they lose the lead, and the opposition wins. So it's really about preparing for the future and trying to understand it, talking to experts out there, trying to get an understanding about what does it mean, this word sustainable. How do I start thinking about that? And to what Susanna said, it's all very well to you just can't implement these things whole as bowls. You have to talk to your family. It's got to be family driven, and then how does that cross across over the business. So family governance, business governance, and then sustainable governance needs to be sort of the three areas that need to be thinking about. And so that conversation first bit is really important. You know, I've mentioned at the start, you know, we have partnerships with the likes of B Corp, but a lot of family businesses aren't ready for a B Corp. You know, haven't even started that conversation internally to even think about jumping in holeless bowlers. So arming themselves for future generations, getting that information and knowledge, and just remembering that you know, it's not just the little person; it's also the bigger family businesses have a role to play here. You know, we represent businesses that are, you know, one of our members is the 5th largest privately owned company in Australia. You know, turning over billions of dollars. You know, they've got a role to play as well as mum and dad on the corner who own a small shop, and you know, wondering about what changes I can put. You know, you look at the Sustainable Development Goals. Some of those goals are really lofty. You know, let's end poverty, but everybody can play their part. Right? How do you distill that information down? So talking to the likes of the United Nations, talking to those who have knowledge around the Sustainable Development Goals, and how do you distill those lofty goals down into a fit for purpose for an organisation of any shape or size. So really, information is key here. The more you can arm yourself with the information, the more you can learn, the bigger impact you can have, and the more prepared you can be for the changing behaviours of consumers, because they will change. They will change the business, whether you like it or not.
Exactly. And since we still have a bit of extra time, and please, anyone who's watching, do pop some questions in the chat. I'm interested when you talk about how the family governance, business governance, and sustainability governance need to almost communicate. Is that possible? Is there a way to get all three of those things talking to each other in terms of how a business functions?
I think the biggest key to that really is to have the family as in connected and communicating on a regular basis, and separating out the different roles that people play a little bit more clearly. So if you're an owner of the business or a future owner, your view of the business and where it's headed and how it's behaving as a corporate citizen is completely different to when you are trying to make strategic and business decisions from a board perspective, as compared to whether you're working in the business and seeing firsthand what actually takes place and how you connect with employees and what's happening on the ground. And then you've got people on the other side who are family who might not ever be owners and who might never be on the board and might never work in it, but they're reliant on it, and they also have an emotional connection into that business, and they have some of their own passion and purpose, so they care. Quite often what we're finding a lot is that the majority of the family is excluded from the conversations that need to be had to be able to create a healthy whole, and to make sure that what you're describing as things connecting and being complementary or supporting each other are actually taking place. Because when you do have people on the family side who do not feel that the business is doing the right thing, or who feel disenfranchised by the actions that are being taken, or who feel that they could add value and they can't find an outlet, but they would perhaps have a huge value to add when you start thinking about sustainability. If you tie the whole human element that is the family alongside the business and drive it from a different place than just numbers, I think there's a huge benefit in that. But it is, as you can imagine, it's confronting the amount of families I step into who, where the next generation is already in their 40s and they're carrying a few bad habits perhaps, or communication hasn't been great. They haven't been able to find something that's going to connect them sufficiently. So culture within the family and the family system is not healthy, and it carries through to the business. You see it is how much it impacts on individuals. So you start looking at the pure impact the family can have. And I saw that when Greg's talking about the ability family businesses have to positively change how Australia shows up and impacts on, from an employment perspective to an environmental perspective, all the different avenues that we have. I think there's really the key. We are all humans. It's the one thing that connects us. Why is it though that we somehow stifle and muffle the majority of the humans who have a role to play within their family business?
Interesting. Okay, well, that is the end of my questions. Are there any resources that you can be suggesting to those watching to learn a little bit more about these things?
Greg, you probably have a few things happening at FBA.
Well, there's always lots happening. There's a little organisation with 3,500 members and growing. There's many different pillars that we have. So, I just reaffirm for those who are in the sustainability business, I think there's a huge market to talk to. We're in the process of, wanting to arm ourselves with the right information to be that pathway for family business to learn. I think there's a massive appetite for family businesses out there looking for information but don't know where to turn. So we'll be happy to talk to anybody who wants to, gain access. Well, not gain access, but have skill sets that they think are complementary to the direction that we're heading in. There's a huge world out there of family enterprises that just are desperate for information and the right information. There's a lot of noise out there. So how can we get the right information in the hands of those who are really interested in wanting to make a change?
Yeah. And so from our perspective, I've got a bit of a diagnostic in particular when it's around how the family relates to each other and whether there's the concept of intergenerational equity kind of conversation. So there's a small diagnostic that can be used just to sort of see what the pulse of the family is, whether they are, whether they have the ability or whether they can sort of see that there might be some change needed from a aligning for the future, looking at, because that's really what we're talking about, intergenerational equity, making sure that this generation and the next and the following generations have the opportunity and the ability to participate and add value and receive value.
Are you able to pop that URL in the chat if you've got it on hand?
I don't have it on hand. I'll have to provide it to you later. Sorry about that. I wasn't quite prepared for that. That's
okay. That's totally fine. Yes, give me an email and I'll send it to the Facebook group because I think there we go. Was I frozen there for a second? So I'll put it into the Facebook group where everyone can access it after the session. So I'll just go ahead and put that Facebook group in again for anyone in here who isn't yet part of it. And yeah, obviously people can go to the Family Business Australia website, or Susanne, what's the best place to find you these days since you're wearing multiple hats?
Probably on LinkedIn.
Okay.
So I'll just sort of mention, obviously, if there's family business owners or operators part of this group, have a look at the service offering that we've got. We base a lot of our education on peer-to-peer learning, so it's not FBA. It's providing information to really other peers who get up and tell their stories and tell their war. We sometimes call them war stories, but they're fantastic when they get up on and talk about mum and dad and brother and sister and the issues that the family business faces, and that's where really rich learnings come from. We probably run about 150 to 160 events a year, although last year might have been a little bit less with COVID, but anyway, we still did a lot online. But that peer-to-peer learning, we're actually getting it from other people telling them the issues that they faced and the process they went through to find the solutions they want. It's really, really powerful. And what we see when we run our programs is a lot of people in the audience start nodding their head and go, geez, you know what? I'm not alone here. I have the same issues with my family. It's great to see that other families are having those issues and are dealing with them in a certain way, and I want to learn from that. So yeah, if you're a family business, I suggest you get involved with us and have a look at us and come along to something and get a feel for it firsthand.
I imagine that would be very enlightening for people who've never really thought about the family aspect of their business. So
yeah, definitely.
Okay, well, fantastic. Thank you both, Susanne and Greg, so much for your time and for all of the fabulous insights that you've shared. I'll send links out to the Facebook group. And we'll start the next session again at 4 o'clock, last session of the day. So look forward to seeing some of you there.
Well done, Sarah. Thanks very much for having us. It's been a pleasure. Well done, everybody. Nice to meet you all.
Bye.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you.